Hey everyone, have you ever used a word and then stopped dead in your tracks and thought, wait a minute, what does that actually mean? Like, where did it even come from? Well, get ready to have your mind blown because today we're diving into some words and phrases whose original meanings are so baffling, so bizarre, and so downright dumb, you'll wonder how they ever came to be. This is the secret history of the words you use every single day, and trust me, some of these are going to make you see the world a little differently. Ready? Let's get into it. Let's kick things off with a classic, a brunch staple, the one and only avocado. It sounds so sophisticated, doesn't it? You picture it on a fancy piece of toast with a sprinkle of chili flakes. But in the ancient Aztec language, Nahuatl, the word ahuacatl didn't just refer to the creamy green fruit we all know and love. It also meant, well, how do I put this delicately? It was also their word for a certain part of the male anatomy. Yep, you heard that right. Suddenly, ordering extra guacamole has a whole new layer of meaning. I promise you, brunch will never be the same again. Let that little tidbit sink in. Speaking of food, let's move on to something a little less anatomical. How about biscuit? In the US, it's a fluffy, buttery delight, often smothered in gravy. In the UK, it's a cookie you dunk in your tea. But where does the word come from? It actually comes from the Latin phrase bis coctus, which literally means twice cooked. Now, this makes perfect sense for the original biscuits, which were hard, dry crackers designed to last for months on long sea voyages. They were cooked once, then cooked again at a low temperature to dry them out completely. But when you think about that warm, flaky, buttery Southern-style biscuit, twice cooked seems like a bit of a stretch, doesn't it? It's more like perfectly cooked once and devoured immediately. All right, let's move out of the kitchen and into the gym. Think about the word muscle. When you're flexing in front of the mirror, admiring your gains, what comes to mind? Strength? Power? Hard work? You're probably not thinking about small, furry rodents. But maybe you should be. The word muscle comes directly from the Latin word musculus, which is the diminutive form of mus, meaning mouse. So, musculus literally means little mouse. Why? Because the ancient Romans thought that the ripple of a bicep flexing under the skin looked like a tiny little mouse scurrying around under a blanket. It's kind of cute when you think about it, but also a little creepy, right? Like you have a family of mice living in your arms. Hey bro, nice mice. It just doesn't have the same ring to it. Now, let's get a little dramatic. Let's talk about tragedy. When we hear that word, we think of Shakespeare, of epic Greek plays, of grand tales filled with sorrow, downfall, and catharsis. It's a word heavy with meaning and emotion, but its origins are, well, a bit more farm-like. The word comes from the Greek tragoidia, which is a combination of tragos, meaning goat, and oid, meaning song. So, tragedy literally translates to goat song. Historians and classicists have debated this for centuries. Was a goat the prize for the best playwright in an ancient festival? Did the chorus of actors dress in goat skins to represent satyrs? Or was it something else entirely? We don't know for sure, but one thing is certain. Goat song is a far cry from the heart-wrenching drama of Romeo and Juliet or Oedipus Rex. Let's talk about a word for when everything goes wrong. Disaster. It sounds so serious, so final. It implies a catastrophic event, something terrible and destructive. But its origins are literally out of this world. The word comes to us from Italian disastro, which is a combination of dis, a prefix meaning bad or ill, and astro, meaning star. So, a disaster is literally a bad star. This comes from the ancient belief in astrology, the idea that the alignment of the stars and planets controlled human fate. If something terrible happened to you, it wasn't bad luck or poor planning. It was because the celestial bodies were in an unfavorable position. You were quite literally star-crossed. So next time you burn the toast or get stuck in traffic, you can just look up at the sky and say, ugh, what a disaster. You'll be more historically accurate than you know. Now with your morning routine. What if I told you that when you shampoo your hair, you're not actually cleaning it? Not originally, anyway. The word shampoo floated into English from Hindi, where the word shampoo had nothing to do with lather, rinse, repeat. It meant to press, knead, or massage. That's right. Back in the day, getting a shampoo was essentially getting a head massage. So next time you're working up a good lather, remember you're honoring an ancient tradition of just giving your scalp a really good rub down. It's less about the suds and more about the massage. Kind of makes you want to spend a little more time on it, doesn't it? Okay, moving from the shower to the bar. We've all been there, or seen someone who's had one too many, and they start to get a little tipsy. It's that perfect word for being slightly drunk, a bit wobbly, but not quite falling over yet. The origin is surprisingly straightforward and visual. It most likely comes from the verb to tip, like when something is unsteady and about to topple over. Think of a tilting chair or a leaning tower of books. That's you. When you're tipsy, you are literally on the verge of tipping over. It's a perfect, almost cartoonish description of that feeling when the room starts to gently sway. It's so literal, you can almost see the little cartoon birds circling your head. Now, let's get into some office politics and social climbing. We all know a sycophant, that person who's always flattering the boss, laughing a little too hard at their jokes, all to get ahead. A total brown-noser. But the origin of this word is way stranger than you could ever imagine. It comes from ancient Greek sycophantes, which literally translates to one who shows the fig. Yes, the fruit. Historians have a few theories about this. One is that it referred to snitches who would inform on people illegally exporting figs from a particular region. So, a tattletale. Another more fun theory is that showing the fig was an ancient, vulgar hand gesture. I'll let you use your imagination for that one. Either way, how did we get from fig shower to obsequious flatterer? It's a truly bizarre journey, but it proves that sucking up has been a weird business for thousands of years. Here's one that might feel a little unfair to about 10% of the population. The word sinister. It drips with evil, malice, and dark intentions. We think of sinister villains and sinister plots. But its original meaning in Latin was incredibly neutral. Sinister simply meant left or on the left side. So what happened? Why did the left get such a bad rap? Well, for centuries, left-handedness was viewed with suspicion and distrust. Many cultures associated the left side with weakness, bad luck, or even evil. This superstition was so strong that it completely transformed the word's meaning over time. So, to all the lefties out there, you're not actually sinister. You just fell victim to some very old, very persistent PR problems. The right side, by the way, in Latin that's dexter, which gives us words like dexterity and dexterous, meaning skillful. Totally unfair, right? Now let us talk about one of the biggest financial decisions you'll ever make, getting a mortgage. It's a heavy word for a heavy commitment. It sounds official, complex, and very adult. But if you break it down, its origin is, well, pretty grim. Mortgage comes to us from Old French. Mort means dead, and gage means pledge. So a mortgage is literally a dead pledge. How comforting. There are two ways to think about this. The pledge, or the deal, dies a happy death when you finally pay off the entire loan. Hooray! But it also dies if you fail to make your payments and the lender takes the property. So, it's a promise that's binding until death. The death of the debt, or the death of your ownership. It's a little bit morbid for a home loan, isn't it? Suddenly, dead pledge feels a lot more intense than 30-year fixed rate. How about this word that became uncomfortably familiar to all of us recently? Quarantine. It sounds so official, so medical, so modern, right? But its roots go way back to the time of the Black Death. Imagine this. It's the 14th century, and Venice is a bustling hub of international trade. But with trade comes the risk of disease. Ships would pull into the harbor, potentially carrying the plague. The Venetian authorities, desperate to protect their city, came up with a rule. Any ship arriving from a plague-ridden port had to anchor offshore for a specific period before anyone could disembark. This period was 40 days. In the Venetian dialect, 40 days is 40 giorni, and from 40 we get our word quarantine. So next time you hear it, picture those sailors stuck on their ships, staring at the Venetian skyline, just waiting for those 40 long days to pass. It wasn't about a virus then. It was about the plague. A 40-day waiting game for survival. All right, let's talk about something that gives us all a little bit of anxiety, a deadline. That word just sounds so final, doesn't it? Deadline. It has a certain life or death intensity. Well, you're not wrong to feel that way, because it used to be literally a matter of life and death. We need to go back to the American Civil War. Around the notoriously harsh military prisons like Andersonville, a line was drawn in the dirt, a boundary encircling the camp. This line was known as the deadline. The rule was brutally simple. If any prisoner crossed that line, for any reason, trying to escape, or even just stumbling, the guards were ordered to shoot them on sight. No questions asked. It was the ultimate irreversible consequence. Thankfully, times have changed. Today, when your boss gives you a deadline, the worst that will happen is a stern email or maybe some weekend work. It's a huge improvement, but it is chilling to think that the stress we feel from a project deadline has its roots in a literal line between life and death. Now, how about a word that we use to be, well, nice? The word nice itself. If I say you're a nice person, you take it as a compliment. It means you're kind, pleasant, agreeable. But if you were an ancient Roman, you'd be deeply insulted. The word nice traces its lineage all the way back to the Latin word nescius, which meant ignorant or unaware. Can you believe it? Calling someone nice was like calling them simple-minded or foolish. So how did an insult become a compliment? It's one of the most fascinating journeys in the English language. Over many centuries, the meaning slowly shifted. From ignorant, it came to mean fussy or particular. Then it evolved to mean precise or subtle. From there, it shifted again to mean refined or cultured. And finally, through all those transformations, it landed on the friendly, positive meaning we use today. It's a total 180-degree flip. The word nice is a perfect example of how language isn't static. It's constantly evolving, and sometimes a word's past is the complete opposite of its present. Let's solve another mystery. Have you ever said, "I don't have a clue"? What you're really saying, if you go back to the original meaning, is, "I don't have a ball of yarn." Seriously. The word clue didn't originally mean a hint or a piece of evidence. It came from the Old English word clue, which was a ball of thread or yarn. So how did we get from a knitting supply to a detective's best friend? For that, we have to thank Greek mythology. You've probably heard the story of Theseus and the Minotaur. The hero, Theseus, has to enter a vast, complex labyrinth to slay the monstrous Minotaur. The problem wasn't just killing the beast. It was finding his way back out of the maze. The Princess Ariadne, who had fallen in love with him, gave him a gift. A clue, a ball of thread. Theseus tied one end to the entrance, unspooled the thread as he went, and after defeating the Minotaur, he simply followed the thread back to safety. That ball of thread was the key to solving his puzzle. Over time, the story was so popular that clue became a metaphor for any piece of information that helps you find your way through a problem or a mystery. A clue is literally the thread that leads you to the solution. Let's step into the limelight. When someone is in the limelight, they are the center of attention, the star of the show. It's a powerful metaphor, but it wasn't always a metaphor. It was a real, physical thing. Before the invention of electric lighting, illuminating a stage, especially highlighting a single performer, was a major challenge. Candles and gas lamps were dim and smoky. Then, in the 1820s, a British inventor named Goldsworthy Gurney developed a revolutionary new form of lighting. It involved heating a cylinder of quicklime, which is just calcium oxide, with an incredibly hot oxyhydrogen flame. When heated to incandescence, the lime would emit a brilliant, intensely bright white light. This was called limelight. Theaters quickly adopted it, using special lanterns to focus this piercing beam of light onto the main actor or actress during their most important scenes. The star of the show was literally standing in the limelight. The technology is long obsolete, replaced by modern spotlights, but the phrase stuck. It became the perfect expression for being the focus of public attention. So the next time you hear about someone stealing the limelight, you can picture an old Victorian stage, with a hissing flame heating a block of rock to create that iconic star-making glow. Here is our next word, bonfire. It sounds so lovely, doesn't it? Like a good fire, maybe from the French word bon. You picture friends gathered around, roasting marshmallows, telling stories under the stars. It's the very image of cozy. But what if I told you the reality is much, much grimmer? The word bonfire actually comes from bone fire. Yes, you heard me right. A bone fire was a massive open-air fire where bones were burned. This could be for all sorts of reasons, sometimes as part of a dark ritual, other times just as a very macabre way of getting rid of animal remains. Suddenly, that cozy campfire scene has a bit of a chill, doesn't it? So next time you're enjoying a bonfire, just remember it's dark and bony past. Not so warm and fuzzy now, is it? Let's move on to our next word. Hazard. We use it all the time to talk about danger, risk, or something that could go wrong. A biohazard, a tripping hazard, a fire hazard. It's a word loaded with a sense of warning and caution, but its origin has nothing to do with danger and everything to do with chance. The word hazard comes to us from an old game of dice. It traveled through Old French from the Arabic word alzar, which simply means the die. That's it. Alzar, the die. So every single time you warn someone about a hazard, you're subconsciously referencing a simple roll of the dice. Life is a game of chance, and the word itself is a constant reminder. It's a gamble whether that banana peel on the floor will cause a problem or not. You're literally rolling the dice every time you encounter a potential hazard. Okay, how about this one? Eavesdrop. When you hear this word, you probably picture a cartoon spy, maybe with a big trench coat and a magnifying glass, hiding under the eaves of a house, pressing their ear to the wall. It's a very specific and slightly comical image. Well, guess what? You're actually spot on. The origin of this word is incredibly literal. In old architecture, the eavesdrop was the specific patch of ground around a house where water would drip from the eaves of the roof. If someone wanted to secretly listen in on a conversation happening inside, the best place to stand was right there, in the eavesdrop, close to the wall but still somewhat concealed by the overhang. So the act of standing in that spot became synonymous with listening in on private conversations. An eavesdropper was literally someone who stood in the roof drip to snoop. It is one of those rare words where the mental picture it creates is exactly how it came to be. Now, let's talk money, specifically your salary. We all work for it. We all want more of it. It represents our livelihood, our payment for a job well done. But what if I told you your salary has a surprisingly salty origin? The word comes directly from the Latin salarium. And what was the salarium? It was the money given to Roman soldiers, specifically to buy salt. In Latin, salt is sal. Back then, salt wasn't just that cheap white stuff you sprinkle on your fries. It was an incredibly valuable commodity. It was the primary way to preserve food before refrigeration. It was used in religious ceremonies, and it was so essential that it was often used as a form of currency. Roman soldiers needed it to preserve their rations on long campaigns, so they were given an allowance for it. That allowance, that salarium, is the direct ancestor of your modern-day paycheck. So technically, when you get paid, you're getting your salt money. Think about that next time you feel like you're not worth your salt. 20 down, 20 to go. Let's tackle a word that feels purely positive. Enthusiasm. When we say someone is enthusiastic, we mean they're excited, passionate, full of positive energy. It's a great quality to have. But the ancient Greeks saw it a little differently. The word's root is the Greek enthusiasmos. This didn't just mean excited, it meant possessed by a god or divinely inspired. It described a state of frenzy, a moment where a divine being literally took control of your body and spoke or acted through you. It was less about cheering at a football game and more about being a vessel for a god, overcome with a power beyond your control. So being enthusiastic was like being temporarily hijacked by the divine. It was intense, a little scary, and definitely not just being really into something. The next time your boss asks you to show more enthusiasm for a project, you can tell them you're trying to channel a deity, but it's taking a minute. Let's go with something beautiful and simple now. The daisy. Picture it. A white-petaled flower with a sunny yellow center dotting a green field. It is the kind of flower you use to make a flower crown or play. They love me not. The name itself sounds sweet and delicate. Daisy. But what if I told you that its name is actually a tiny, poetic sentence? The word daisy is a contraction, a smooshed-together version of the Old English phrase day's ege, which translates to day's eye. Why? Because this charming little flower is like nature's own eyeball. Its petals close up over the center at night, as if it's going to sleep, and then open up again in the morning to greet the sun. It literally opens its eye for the day. So every time you see a field of daisies, you're actually being watched by thousands of tiny days' eyes. It's kind of beautiful and a little bit creepy, all at the same time, isn't it? It adds a whole new layer of wonder to such a common flower. All right, from the gentle fields of daisies, let's move to the intense battlefield of the chessboard. You've cornered your opponent's king. There's no escape. You proudly declare, checkmate. It sounds so final, so triumphant. To a modern English speaker, it almost sounds like you're saying, check it, mate, like a friendly but firm announcement of your victory. But the true origin is way more dramatic and a lot less friendly. The word checkmate traveled a long way to get to us. It comes from the Persian phrase Shah Mat. Now, Shah means king. You might recognize it from titles like the Shah of Iran, but Mat, that means is dead. So when you say checkmate, you're not just saying the king is in trouble. You are literally declaring, the king is dead. It's not a warning, it's a death sentence. Suddenly, that polite game of chess feels a bit more like Game of Thrones, doesn't it? The king is helpless, the king is finished, the king is dead. Much more hardcore than check it, mate. Next up, let's talk about a word that sparkles with elegance and allure. Glamour. When we hear glamour, we think of Hollywood red carpets, dazzling gowns, and that certain magnetic charm that some people just seem to have. It's all about beauty, sophistication, and enchantment. But if you traveled back a few centuries and told someone they were glamorous, they might think you were calling them a witch. Seriously, the word glamour is actually a Scottish alteration of the word grammar. I know, what could possibly be glamorous about grammar? Noun-verb agreement isn't exactly a red carpet look. But back then, grammar was a much broader term. It didn't just mean sentence structure, it referred to any kind of scholarly learning. And in a time when most people were illiterate, scholars who could read and write, especially in classical languages like Latin, were seen as mysterious. Their knowledge was so exclusive it seemed like a form of magic. This association extended to other arcane studies like astrology and alchemy. So, grammar and its variant glamour became linked to casting spells and creating magical illusions. Over time, the meaning shifted from literal magic to a more metaphorical kind of enchantment. The captivating allure we now call glamour. So the next time you're trying to add a little glamour to your life, just remember you're basically channeling your inner nerdy wizard. Okay? From magic to muscle. Let's head to the gymnasium. You go there to lift weights, run on the treadmill, maybe join a spin class. It's a place for physical exercise, right? The word itself sounds pretty straightforward. Well, yes, but the original gymnasiums in ancient Greece were let's say, a more liberating experience. The word gymnasium comes directly from the Greek word gymnasian. And what does gymnasian mean? It literally means a place to exercise naked. Yep, you heard that right. The root word gymnos means naked. Ancient Greek athletes, who were all men, didn't bother with fancy athletic wear. They trained, wrestled, and competed completely in the nude. It was a way to celebrate the beauty and strength of the human body. They saw it as a tribute to the gods. So, the next time you're feeling self-conscious at the gym because you forgot your best pair of leggings, just take a moment to be thankful that we've added clothes to the modern gym experience. It definitely makes leg day a lot less awkward for everyone involved. Things have certainly changed, and in this case, probably for the better. Now let's look at a word with a bit of a rebellious streak. Sabotage. This word brings to mind images of spies cutting wires, secret agents planting bugs, or any kind of deliberate, sneaky act of destruction to undermine an enemy or a rival. It's all very cloak and dagger. But the origin of the word is much more down to earth and comes from the feet of angry workers. The word sabotage is derived from the French word sabot. A sabot was a simple, heavy wooden clog worn by factory and farm workers in the 19th and early 20th centuries. The story goes that during the early Industrial Revolution, when working conditions were often terrible and disputes with factory owners were common, workers needed a way to protest. One of the most effective forms of protest was to stop the factory's production. And how did they do that? By throwing their sturdy, clunky wooden shoes, their sabots, into the complex gears and mechanisms of the machinery, grinding everything to a halt. This act of literally shoeing the machine became known as sabotage. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the biggest acts of defiance come from the simplest of tools, and a whole lot of frustration. How about this one, thankfully, you don't hear in a doctor's office anymore? Hysteria. For centuries, this was an actual medical diagnosis, almost exclusively for women. If a woman was considered too emotional, anxious, or just generally not conforming to expectations, she could be labeled hysterical. But where does this term come from? The origin is, frankly, insulting and ridiculous. It traces back to the ancient Greek word hystera, which means uterus. Yes, you heard that right. Influential physicians like Hippocrates and Plato believed that a woman's uterus wasn't a fixed organ. They thought it could literally wander around her body like a lost pet. And this wandering womb, in their expert opinion, would press on other organs, causing all sorts of chaos, from shortness of breath to wild mood swings. So the cure? Often it involved things to lure the uterus back into place, sometimes with pleasant smells. It's a perfect example of how medical science was once just a cocktail of guesswork and blatant sexism. The idea that a major organ could just go on a road trip inside your body is one of the dumbest medical theories in history, but it shaped the perception of women's health for thousands of years. Next up, a phrase that describes pure chaos: to run amok. When you hear that someone is running amok, you picture them causing a wild, uncontrolled disturbance. It's a powerful image, and its origin story is just as intense. The phrase comes to us from the Malay word amuk. In traditional Malay culture, amuk described a specific phenomenon where warriors, often feeling cornered or deeply shamed, would enter a frenzied, trance-like state. They would grab their weapons and lash out with uncontrollable fury, attacking anyone and everyone in their path, friend or foe. It was seen as a sudden, homicidal outburst. When European explorers like Captain Cook encountered this in Southeast Asia, they brought the word back with them. It was exotic, it was terrifying, and it perfectly captured a specific kind of violent chaos. Over time, running amok was watered down in English to mean any kind of rowdy or out-of-control behavior, like kids running amok in a candy store. It's lost its life-or-death intensity, but the root of the word points to a much darker and more specific cultural concept. Let's move on to something we say every single day without a second thought. Goodbye. It seems so simple, right? Just a standard way to end a conversation. But this little word is actually hiding a heartfelt blessing. Goodbye is a beautiful piece of linguistic evolution. It's a contraction, a smooshed-together version of the phrase, God be with ye. Think about it. In the 14th century, when you were parting ways with someone, you were essentially saying, may God be with you on your journey. It was a genuine prayer for their safety and well-being. As centuries passed, God be with ye was shortened for convenience. It became God be with you, then God bye, and eventually it morphed into the goodbye we use today. We've dropped the explicit religious part, but the sentiment of wishing someone well is still baked into the word's DNA. It's a tiny, forgotten piece of history, and a blessing that we exchange dozens of times a week, completely unaware of its profound origins. It's not dumb, but the way we've forgotten its meaning certainly is. All right, our next word is one that sounds incredibly cool and menacing: assassin. You picture a shadowy figure, a hired killer, a master of stealth. The word itself feels sharp and dangerous, but its origins are shrouded in legend, smoke, and a healthy dose of medieval propaganda. The word assassin is believed to trace back to a mysterious Persian sect from the time of the Crusades, properly known as the Nizari Ismailis. Their enemies, however, gave them a nickname, Hashishin, which literally translates to hashish users. A popular legend, spread by figures like Marco Polo, claimed that the leader of this group would drug his young followers with hashish. He would then bring them to a secret garden paradise filled with every imaginable pleasure. He'd tell them this was a glimpse of heaven, and that if they died in his service, they would return there for eternity. This supposedly made them completely fearless and loyal, ready to be sent on deadly political missions. So the original assassin wasn't just a killer. They were supposedly a hashish user brainwashed into service. While modern historians debate how true these stories are, it might have just been propaganda, the name stuck. The legend was more exciting than the reality, and it gave us one of the most chilling words in the English language. We're in the home stretch, and it's a heavy one: bigot. We use this term to describe someone who is stubbornly and intolerantly devoted to their own prejudices. It's a powerful insult, and its origin story is a fantastic lesson in how insults are born. While etymologists have a few competing theories, one of the most popular and compelling ones traces bigot back to a clash of cultures between the French and the Germans. The theory goes that French speakers started noticing that their German neighbors frequently used the oath bei Gott, which means by God in German. To the French ear, this constant, guttural-sounding oath seemed brutish and unsophisticated. So, they started using the phrase bei Gott as a derogatory nickname for Germans, mocking them for their perceived piety or their jarring language. The insult caught on. Over time, bigot evolved from being a specific slur against Germans into a general term for anyone who is obstinately and unpleasantly prejudiced. It's a classic case of one group making fun of another group's turn of phrase, and that joke spiraling into one of the most potent insults we have for a closed-minded person. The original meaning? Simply, by God. How dumb is that? Here is a word many of us have been called at some point: nerd. We think of a nerd as someone super smart, maybe a little obsessed with a particular hobby, but often socially awkward. You might picture glasses, pocket protectors, the whole cliché. But where did this word come from? A science lab? A university library? Nope. It came from the whimsical world of Dr. Seuss. That's right. The very first appearance of the word nerd was in Dr. Seuss's 1950 book, If I Ran the Zoo. In the book, the narrator lists all the bizarre creatures he would collect for his zoo, and one of them is described as a nerd from the land of Katru. The illustration shows this grumpy, furry little creature. It had nothing to do with intelligence or social skills. But somehow, within the next year, teenagers in Detroit started using the term to describe someone who was a drip or a square. The word caught on, evolved, and now it's the go-to term for our beloved brainy friends, from a grumpy Dr. Seuss creature to a badge of honor in Silicon Valley. What a journey. Okay, next on our list is a word we use to describe total disaster: fiasco. You might say, my presentation was a complete fiasco, meaning it was an embarrassing failure. It sounds so dramatic, doesn't it? Well, its origin is a bit less dramatic and a lot more glassy. The word fiasco comes to us from Italian, where it literally means flask or bottle. So how do we get from a simple bottle to a catastrophic failure? The link comes from the world-renowned Venetian glass-making industry. The master glass blowers were aiming to create intricate, beautiful works of art. But sometimes a piece would have a flaw, a bubble, or an imperfection that ruined the delicate design. When this happened, they couldn't just throw the molten glass away. Instead of turning it into a masterpiece, they would abandon the original plan and quickly shape it into a simple, common flask, a fiasco. So the expression fair fiasco, which means to make a bottle, became theatrical slang in Italy for a performance that failed miserably on stage. It was the equivalent of a craftsman failing to create a work of art and ending up with just a plain old bottle. So the next time you have a fiasco, just picture a frustrated Venetian glassblower sighing and making yet another flask. Now for a phrase that sounds incredibly poetic and tragic: forlorn hope. When we hear it, we imagine a desperate last-ditch effort with almost no chance of success. It's the stuff of epic movies, the final charge against overwhelming odds. But what if I told you the hope in forlorn hope has nothing to do with hoping for something? This is actually a classic case of misinterpretation, a linguistic lost-in-translation moment. The phrase comes from the Dutch verloren hoop. But in this context, the Dutch word hoop doesn't mean hope. It means troop, heap, or group. So, verloren hoop literally translates to lost troop. This was a military term for a select group of soldiers, often volunteers, who were sent on an extremely dangerous mission, like leading the charge to breach a fortress wall. They were the first ones in, the ones who drew the most fire. They were considered a lost troop because their chances of survival were incredibly slim. So when the English heard this phrase, they mistook hoop for hope, and the phrase forlorn hope was born, keeping the sense of desperation but losing the original military meaning of a lost troop. It's not about feeling hopeful, it's about being part of a group that's probably not coming back. Let's move on to something a little more luxurious. The word posh. We use it to describe things that are elegant, stylish, and upper class. A posh hotel, a posh accent, a posh car. It just sounds expensive, doesn't it? There's a very popular story about where this word comes from, and while historians debate its absolute certainty, it's just too good not to share. The theory is that posh is an acronym for port out, starboard home. The story goes that in the heyday of the British Empire, wealthy travelers sailing between Britain and India on steamships would request specific cabins to avoid the sweltering sun. On the journey out to India, the port side of the ship, the left side, would be the shadiest. On the return journey home, the starboard side, the right side, would be cooler. These more desirable, sun-protected cabins were more expensive and were reserved for the most affluent passengers. Their tickets were supposedly stamped with the acronym POSH, Port Out, Starboard Home, to indicate their deluxe accommodations. So being posh literally meant you had the money to afford the best, most comfortable spot on the ship. While there's no definitive proof, like a surviving ticket with the stamp, it's a fantastic story that perfectly captures the essence of what posh means today. Now let's talk about trivia. We all love a good trivia night, right? We think of trivia as a collection of interesting but ultimately unimportant facts and details. And guess what? That's almost exactly what it originally meant. To understand this, we have to go back to ancient Rome. The word trivia is the Latin plural of trivium. A trivium was a place where three roads met, tri meaning three, and via meaning road. These crossroads were common public spaces where people would gather, hang out, and chat. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a town square or a local coffee shop. Because these were such ordinary, everyday places, the conversations and information shared there were considered commonplace, public knowledge, and generally insignificant. Anything you'd hear at the trivium was, well, trivia. It was public chatter, not profound academic knowledge. So, when we talk about trivial matters today, we are re-tapping into that ancient Roman idea of something being so common and public that it lacks any real importance. It's the kind of stuff you'd overhear at a crossroads. Now, for a light one, let's talk about that feeling of pure joy, being on cloud nine. When you're on cloud nine, you're blissfully happy, right? But have you ever stopped to ask, why cloud nine? Why not cloud 7 or cloud 10? Well, one popular theory takes us back to the world of meteorology. In the 1896 International Cloud Atlas, yes, that was a real thing, clouds were classified into different types. The cumulonimbus cloud, which is that massive, fluffy, majestic cloud that seems to float higher than all the others, was designated as cloud number 9. So when you say you're on cloud 9, you're metaphorically floating on the highest, fluffiest, most impressive cloud in the sky. It's the peak of atmospheric happiness. Isn't that cool? The next time you're feeling ecstatic, you can picture yourself lounging on a giant cumulonimbus. From the clouds, let's come back down to Earth and into the world of technology with our second word, robot. It sounds so modern, so futuristic, doesn't it? But its origins are actually quite humble and a bit dark. The word was first introduced to the world by the Czech writer Karel Čapek in his 1920 play, R.U.R., which stands for Rossum's Universal Robots. But Čapek didn't just invent the word out of thin air. He borrowed it from the Czech word robota. And what does robota mean? It simply means forced labor, drudgery, or serfdom. So, the first robots weren't imagined as shiny, helpful companions, but as mechanical serfs, built to perform the hard labor that humans no longer wanted to do. It gives a whole new, slightly more somber meaning to your Roomba, doesn't it? They were literally born from the idea of servitude. Okay, next phrase. You've definitely said this one before, spill the beans. We all know it means to reveal a secret, to let the cat out of the bag. But what do beans have to do with secrets? This one might take us all the way back to ancient Greece. Imagine an old-school voting system. Instead of paper ballots or electronic machines, people used beans to cast their votes in secret. A white bean might mean yes, and a black bean might mean no. These beans would be collected in a jar or an urn. Now, what would happen if some clumsy person accidentally knocked over the jar? The beans would spill everywhere, and the secret results of the vote would be revealed for everyone to see, prematurely. So, spilling the beans literally meant revealing a secret outcome. The next time you're gossiping, you're basically taking part in an ancient Greek voting mishap. All right, let's fast forward to the digital age with a word we all know and, well, we all know it. Troll. An internet troll is that person who deliberately posts inflammatory or off-topic comments online just to provoke an emotional response and derail the conversation. But where did this name come from? Many people assume it's from the mythical troll, the grumpy creature living under a bridge. But that's not it. The term actually comes from a fishing technique. Trolling is a method of fishing where you drag a baited hook on a line behind a moving boat, hoping to entice a fish to bite. Think about it. An internet troll does the exact same thing. They cast out a baited comment and drag it through a forum or comment section, waiting for an angry user to bite. They're not looking for a real discussion. They're fishing for reactions. So an internet troll isn't a monster. They're just a very, very annoying fisherman. And for our final word today, let's talk about the word dumb. This one has a particularly interesting, and frankly, a rather sad history. Nowadays, we use dumb to mean stupid or unintelligent, but that's not its original meaning at all. Originally, the Old English word dumb simply meant unable to speak. It had no connection to intelligence whatsoever. It was a purely descriptive word for someone who was mute. So how did the meaning change so drastically? Well, over time, a deeply unfortunate prejudice developed. People who were unable to speak were often wrongly and cruelly assumed to be unintelligent, simply because they couldn't communicate in the same way as others. This ignorant assumption became so widespread that the word's meaning gradually shifted from mute to stupid. It's a powerful and somber reminder of how societal biases and prejudice can literally change the meaning of a word, embedding a historical injustice right into our language. It really makes you think about the power of the words we use and where they come from. And there you have it, 40 words whose meanings are far dumber, stranger, and more interesting than you ever imagined. Language is a living, breathing thing, and it's constantly changing in the most unexpected ways. Which one surprised you the most? Let me know down in the comments. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today. If you enjoyed this journey through weird word origins, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the strange and wonderful. We'll see you in the next one.